Well, greetings, amazing students. My name is Dr. Antonio Mexico. It is a pleasure to serve as your instructor for Social Work 530 Marginalized Populations. As I said before, I'm an associate professor in the Division of Social Work. I've been at CBU since 2019, but involved with the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences here at CBU since about 2015 or so. I currently serve as the Associate Dean for our Division of Social Work. So I oversee all of our Division of Social Work programs from the bachelor's, master's to doctoral level. And I am happy, honored to serve as your instructor for marginalized populations. So what we're going to be doing is embarking on a journey over this semester, right? A few lectures, some homework, some assignments, all of these things to really drive home from a social work and a Christian worldview perspective. What does it mean to have a heart for the oppressed and a heart for the marginalized from a social work perspective? And so we are going to engage in this journey in this course of Social Work 530 together, and I am excited to present this coursework to you. So let's get started for our very first lecture. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint slides here. And again, what I would like to say is welcome, welcome, welcome to Marginalized Populations Social Work 530. So let's bring this up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my screen up here so you can see me while I talk. And feel free to listen to this recording as you are, doing other things, taking care of stuff. Don't try to watch and drive, right? But if you want to listen and drive, that may help. But either way, here we go. It's a privilege to start this class with you. So, a little bit about me before we get started. As I mentioned before, I serve as the Associate Dean for our Division of Social Work here in CBU, and I also am an Associate Professor of Social Work within our College of Behavioral and Social Sciences. But you may be wondering, who is this guy? Who is this professor that's going to be walking me through this class for, the next 15 weeks, and what is he about? So I'm just going to share first just a few things about me. This is a picture of my wife and daughter. This is a slightly older picture. This was my daughter's first communion, but she is now actually 15 years old, believe it or not. So I met my wife there, Ruby, in college. We met in undergrad and have been together since. And so we've been married for 19 years, been together for 24 years. And our daughter is our one and only. So that's one thing about me. Love family, love the opportunity to be a father and a husband and all of these other things. Another thing about me, I'm a huge Dodger fan. So go Dodgers. That's before we started, really getting back into the World Series and doing it big. And so I've always been a homegrown Dodger fan, LA fan. If you're a Dodger fan, welcome. If you love other teams, you're still welcome. All right. You can still come over to the Dodger side. Don't worry. There's always room for one more. Okay. Another thing about me, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, love Star Wars, love the Star Wars trilogy as well as all the previous videos. The later videos that came out. And I'm also a Marvel fan, comic books. Growing up, I won't lie, I was a DC fan and still am to some extent. But when the Marvel movies came out, they really introduced the characters in new, exciting ways. And so I'm a Marvel fan now, love the movies, love the comic books, which has also made my daughter and I both Star Wars and Marvel fans. So we blend over connect over Star Wars and all things Marvel related. And it's just a blast to be able to do that with my daughter. Another thing about me and my family, we love dogs, and we particularly have a heart for rescue dogs. So all of the dogs that we have that we take care of and that live with us are little fur babies for us. And this is our latest addition. This is Rosie the Bulldog. Rosie was a rescue that came out of Las Vegas, Nevada, out of a puppy mill. And she's an absolute joy to have. I love English Bulldogs, but I love all dogs, especially old ones that are need a home. So a little bit about me. And then the last thing about me, hey, I love tacos. I don't know if you love tacos, but I love tacos. In fact, I love food. I just love to eat. So listen, if you love food, if you love to eat, we've got something in common already. Congratulations, we hit it off to a good start. But here's what I really wanted to share with you. I share this with you because I want you to know that out of all the classes that I teach here at CBU, marginalized populations is my absolute favorite. This particular class connects with my heart, connects with my experience, having worked in social work for the past 17 years. And working in social work for the past 17 years, I've had the joy of working with incarcerated individuals, foster youth, both in Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange County, LA County. And I've had the opportunity to work with children in settings of remote settings, migrant families, and all of those vulnerable populations. And so I've had the opportunity to work with so many historically marginalized populations over my career, that I bring my heart to this class. There's one more piece that I want to share with you, and it's a video from a social worker who has a very similar background to me. And the reason I want to share this video is because I want to explain where my heart comes from with social work. Some of the greatest joys that I've had is working with clients who other people would feel that there was no value in investing in. That my clients, whether they were incarcerated or foster or adopted youth, come from backgrounds of trauma and abuse, other people would say those individuals and their behaviors are too far gone. Why would I spend time working with them? And those are exactly the populations that I enjoy working with the most. And when I came across this short TED Talk, really quick, it's spoken word, like a poem, I realized that this individual's background is very similar to mine. And I want to take a moment and share this with you so that you can kind of appreciate the heart that I'm bringing to social work and really the flavor, if you will, of the content that I'm going to bring forward in this class. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen and share this spoken word with you, and then we'll dive back into the content, okay? Here we go.
When I tell people what I do for a living, they often respond by saying things like, "Bless your soul, that must be difficult." And my all-time favorite, "It's so nice to see someone not working for the money." I'm a social worker. I tend to the wounds of people crucified to circumstance, carry hope and band-aids in my briefcase, share my own scars for street cred. I work with kids who see their probation officers more than their fathers. They wear sagging pants in their parents' mistakes, introduce themselves as accidents waiting to happen. They are a Hollywood casting director's wet dream. Tattooed with the temper, do-rag D-boys, boys in the hood, mi vida loca. They speak in sign language because they have been taught they are voiceless. Marginalization is the chip on their shoulder. It is so heavy they walk with the limp, pass it off as swag. Their fingers, more familiar with pipes than pencils. Eye-smoked clothes paint their worldview the color of devils as they search for God or anyone else they can just look up to. Each one has a story. Emilio wants to change, so he keeps a lucky penny in his pants pocket along with the quarter I gave him to call with whenever he is in need. In the desperation of his 15-year-old eyes, I see more potential than an idea Rivera never manifested on a canvas. He makes the city his, scribes pieces of his soul into windows, not knowing his pain is as transparent as the glass, sprays a masked moniker underneath street lamps, so he always shines brighter than the darkness of his insecurities. He left his self-esteem next to a cigarette butt at the bottom of a bottle bought by relatives who see no problem feeding fires. He screams in spontaneous combustion but believes nobody's listening, so he commits another crime. He likes going to court because there, at least he knows someone is paying attention to his sentences. I am his social worker attempting to make sense of his syntax. He didn't fall through the cracks, they swallowed him. I've seen it happen in broad daylight. Sun turning the other cheek, cowering behind the clouds, concrete quicksand traps youth like Venus fly. Homies who claim to have backs, front, offering no help, and so many of our kids are sinking. Emilio asks me for direction, but there's only one way to go from where he is. I show him his heartbeat's his compass. We look at the scars on his psyche. I ask if he's ready to replace them with dirt underneath his fingernails. He asks me how he is supposed to escape the sand. I remind him he cannot ask for one to guide his footsteps if he's not willing to move his feet first. I speak in cliches, talk of butterflies and phoenixes and of hip-hop and so many ugly things that have bloomed into beauty. I speak in truths. I tell him I don't know if things will be okay. I show him statistics are stalking him in prisons, plan housewarming parties. I tell him the streets, they don't change, but I know that people do. Hope is not a helium-filled balloon that has slipped from our fingertips. We do not have to watch potential float away. I am a social worker. I work with kids who learn to spell stigma before their first names, but each one is an artist learning to draw their own conclusions. Their pencils are heavy burdens built without erasers on purpose, because sometimes the best thing you can do is not go back. I am a social worker, and no, I don't do it for the money. I do it simply because I still believe in people, and I really hope that you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and all of you still do too.
Okay. I wanted to share this video with you for a few important reasons. One of which, my heart connects with the career background of our speaker, right? So over the course of my 17 years working in the field of social work, like I said, I've had the opportunity to work with mostly at-risk youth, some of which were incarcerated. To this day, I still do Bible study with incarcerated youth who are serving in juvenile hall and serving rehabilitative sentences. It's something that I have a passion for. In addition to working with incarcerated youth, I had the opportunity to work with initiated gang youth, as well as migrant youth and some others populations as well. I bring all this up because there's something that actually you and I have in common. Even though we're in professor and student relationship, there's something that binds us together that was discussed in this spoken word. And that's where our heart is. Our heart, we chose, God called you, I believe, to a career in social work because you have a passion for serving people. You want to improve the circumstances of individuals and communities, and you believe that people can change. And so I want to commend you for choosing a career in social work because it is a noble profession, an extremely challenging profession at times, but rewarding in more ways than I can ever thank God for. And so I want to commend you on that and let you know that our hearts are connected in more ways than one. So let me go on and continue on with our presentation for today. So what is this class? Social Work 530, Marginalized Populations. What are we studying here? What are we doing, right? Well, Social Work 530, like I said, is my absolute favorite class to teach at CBU. And the reason is what this class is designed to do. So there's a couple of things, and I won't read all of this to you, but I do want to emphasize a couple of highlights of why I'm so excited about this course. One of the main points of this course is to build competency, in particular to build competent, successful social workers that understand social and cultural social work practice skills. We're going to be talking about individuals who maybe have a different background, a life identity or choice or circumstances than you. And in order to understand the clients that we're serving, what we want to do is to be able to understand and analyze concepts, terminology related to marginalized populations, like terms like privilege, marginalization, social equality, cultural diversity, and understand them in their broadest definitions. Over the course of our semester, we'll be discussing all of these terms, and tonight actually a few of them as well. I want you to become familiar with sociocultural concepts and the human rights approach. Here's what's unique, about our career as social workers. We are invested in serving individuals and honoring the inherent dignity of every individual. We believe that there are certain rights that are given to all human beings, or at least should be. For example, the right to shelter, right? The right to clean water, the right to safety and security. As social workers, we believe that every individual has a right to those things. And if they don't, for political, economic reasons, whatever the case is, social workers work to achieve, to advocate for, and to build those rights for individuals and communities. Now, a couple of other things that I'm really excited about is this class in particular is designed to be transformative in nature. What does that mean? It means that my hope for you as a student is that you leave this class thinking, experiencing, feeling for the world, seeing the world differently than when you entered. Does that mean that you need to change your opinion about every topic in marginalized population that we cover? Not necessarily. But does it mean that you leave being able to see life through the perspectives of some of these marginalized populations? Then absolutely yes. So my greatest hope for you in higher education and your graduate studies is that your education will be transformational, that you leave changed from this process. The other component is to understand your own faith and respective worldview with comparing and contrasting values and philosophical assumptions of one's faith. And so, what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to be presenting the information from a Christian worldview. And what I'd invite you to do is to be open, right, to the topics that we discuss, the ideals, the theoretical orientations, the theology that I'm going to present to you, so that maybe you might even deepen your own walk with Christ. And so that's what we're going to do in this class as well. And finally, what we're going to be able to do is build upon your skills as social workers to include group efficacy. That means advocating for marginalized groups, being there to be a voice for others whose voice maybe historically has been taken, and to be able to improve your communication skills as social workers. So this is what our class is designed to do, okay? Now, what are the expectations for this course? Well, not much from you, okay? I just have a few guidelines here. Is that what I'm hoping of what you can expect from me here on the right, as well as what I will expect from you. So together, what I hope is that our time together will be respectful, that we will respect one another and our worldviews. Remember, my job as a faculty member is to present to you new ideas, new theoretical orientations, combined with the Christian worldview to teach you about marginalized populations and prepare you for social work practice. Now, what does that mean? I need your help in participating in the course material and our discourse, our discussions. So when we get to residency, we'll all engage in in-person discussions, but in the meantime, there'll be opportunities for you to engage in discussion with me through assignments, through papers, reflection, all of these other things. What I'm asking for is please watch or at least listen to all of the lectures that I provide. Complete the readings because it's going to provide a well-rounded background of what I'm discussing, okay? I'm going to ask you to please be open to new ideas, thoughts, and perceptions around the world. Just because you may hear a theoretical orientation or a marginalized population or a theological presentation that looks a little bit different from your own background, or that maybe you feel like you're like, I'm not sure I agree with that. Let's not jump to the place of saying it's different, that it's bad or it's wrong, but let's look at it and say, tell me more about that. Let's take a question-oriented approach, right? The idea behind higher education and being transformative in our educational approach is that we entertain a thought, right? But not necessarily have to agree with it. In fact, that's what Aristotle said. Aristotle had once said, the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought, but not necessarily agree with it. That's where I hope we can be. Let's be open, right? Let's to these ideas. Want to adopt a question-oriented approach, right? So if you see anything that's a little funny, or you're like, oh, Dr. Mako, I've never heard that before. I'm not sure I agree. You can follow up with, can you tell me more? This is where I'm happy to meet with you for office hours. If you're close to campus and want to come on campus, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. We can meet for office hours via Zoom, whatever the case is. But I am here for questions. And so if you have questions as you're going through the lecture, send me an email. We could do office hours. We can meet over coffee. I'm here for you, okay? What you're going to get from me, respect for you as a student. I am so happy you're here with me. I realize you're bringing your background, your knowledge, your experiences to the classroom, and I'm eager to be able to engage with you in those conversations. I will always be clear in my communication with you. Any examples that I give you in the class are going to be concrete, real life examples, not pulled from a book, but pulled from my career, lived, done, seen, went through, cried after, the whole thing, right? I'm going to give you real life examples. I'm always going to give you constructive feedback, not criticism. And so what I'm going to do is if I leave you feedback on your papers, it's always going to be strength-based and how do we improve? How do we get better? You can trust that. I'm always going to be transparent with you. Exactly how I am here on screen is how I'm going to be in person. And so you can always count on me being transparent. And then the idea behind it is you can expect from me is that in order to engage in some good, healthy dialogue, I will ask questions at times that challenge us collectively or individually to think about conventional societal thoughts or ideals and say, how do those fit in? How do those fit in with a social work perspective? Most importantly, how do they fit in with our Christian worldview? These things that we see as normal, acceptable in society, how do they fit in when we pair them up and hold them up and test them against Scripture? Okay, and so that's what I'm going to do. That's what we're looking forward to. So let's continue on with the lesson, all right? At this point in time, I'm going to highly, please beg you, encourage you, please take a moment to look at the syllabus. Look at the syllabus because on the syllabus are going to be your assignments, your due dates, and course policies. We have policies that we need to adhere to within our division for late work. We have policies that are adhered to in terms of points and distribution. And so if you can please take a moment after this lecture, go through the syllabus for our class, look at all the assignments and due dates, and should you have any questions about the policies, the assignment descriptions, the schedule, the due dates, please send me an email and I will make sure to respond to you as quickly as possible, okay? But please take a moment to review the course syllabus. All right, let's start getting on to the good stuff. In this class, all right, when we're talking about marginalized populations, we're going to be examining, like I said, cultures and backgrounds that are different from ours. And so my job as a professor is to create a safe environment, okay, for all of you, all right, a safe environment. But that doesn't always mean that it will be comfortable. Remember when I said my goal is to be able to engage in discourse and challenge you all academically, spiritually, emotionally, like all of that, right? And so in order to do that, I want to create a safe place. But in order to create transformation, right, changes in ideas and perspectives, it doesn't always mean it's going to be comfortable. Growth comes at times through discomfort. And so to elaborate between the two, safety is really that feeling that in our class, in our time together, you can ask questions without fear of judgment. You are always going to get that from me, never be judged for a question. You can voice your perspective and know that you will be validated for the fact that it is your truth. Others, you may challenge, the ideas, but the challenge is in the spirit of growth and a shared understanding of growth, okay? And so that's what I'm going to do for our class. We may have different perspectives and ideas and opinions. That is fine because that's your truth. But what I need to do is continue to ask questions, right? So that we can come to a new level of understanding and growth. For comfort, that's different, right? Comfort is when you feel that in this space, your reality will be agreed with, validated, and unchallenged. You don't have to explain yourself to be understood, and you don't have to justify your perspective as everyone else shares it. As you can see, comfort, creating an environment that's comfortable for everyone is very difficult, right? Because we all bring different perspectives to the table. So naturally, people are going to see things differently than you. They may have questions or wish to challenge it at times. For that reason, I cannot promise the class would always feel comfortable, right? But I can guarantee you it will always be safe. No one will ever be belittled, harmed, degraded, subjugated, insulted as a result of their belief system. And I will always make sure this is a safe place. All right. So I just wanted to share that as we dive into our content. All right, let's get started with the good stuff. So Marge Pops, what is this class rooted in? What is the foundation that is poured below Social Work 530 that makes up this class of marginalized populations? What is the DNA of this class? The DNA of this class is rooted in social justice, what we call praxis. Praxis is this fancy $5 word that you can use at cocktail parties. And when people ask you, where are you studying? And you say CBU, and they're like, oh, what are you studying? And you're like, I'm learning social work praxis. And they're like, wow, where'd you get that fancy word? Well, practice just means it's the combination of theory and practice combined. When you take theoretical orientation, when you take social work practice, when you put those together with a lens on social justice, you get social justice praxis. And that is what this perspective, this course is built upon, social justice. You'll notice that one of our 4 pillars at CBU is to be globally minded, to adopt a world perspective. We are going to work on that in this class, to build a globally minded, human rights centered approach to our work as social workers. One of the things we want to do is understand and challenge hegemony, marginalization, subjugation or by dominant groups, okay? And so hegemony is really just another 5-letter academic word for status quo, the powers that make decisions, okay? And so when we understand that sometimes there are hegemonic practices, meaning practices that exist from dominant groups that can sometimes either intentionally or unintentionally do harm, right, unintentionally at times to oppressed groups, we want to challenge that as social workers. We want to bring those to light and talk about why they may be harmful to certain groups. So for these reasons, we are rooting our class in social justice. Now, what does that really mean? What does that look like in action? Well, you see in the background of this slide, you see all these trays of food that are here, right? These were not here because Dr. Mako was hungry. They're here for an actual reason, okay? If you notice, this style of dining is what we would call what? buffet style, right? Buffet style. So think about the restaurant like Golden Corral. Golden Corral is a buffet style restaurant. You go into Golden Corral, you pay some money, you get your little drink cup, and you get that piece of paper that you need to put on the table, right? So that you can hold your table. And then when you've got your table and your drink set up, what do you do at Golden Corral? You go to the buffet. And at the buffet, there are these trays and trays and trays of food. They're in sections by meats and by breads and by salads and by desserts, right? And I'm sorry if this is making you hungry, but this analogy really does come into play here, okay? And what do? You get to do at a buffet. You get to pick and choose what you want to eat and when you want to eat it, right? So maybe we've got your plate, you're all excited, and you go and you look at the salad and you take a look at the salad and you say, not today, Satan, right? And you go moving right past the salad. And what do you decide to do? You start with dessert. So you go over and you pick some dessert. And then maybe you go and look at all the meats and you choose one of the 5 meats that are available. And maybe you go to the table with all the sides and you look at the sides and you like 3 of the 6 sides that are available and you choose those. And what you do in a buffet is you pick and choose, right? What you like and what you get to eat. The challenge is with social work and with social justice. And I would even go as far to say in our mission as Christians, right? We cannot take a buffet approach to social justice. There is no buffet approach to social justice. What does that mean? It means that I can't say that I'm about advocating for and serving or advancing the rights of immigrants and refugees, but I'm not interested in the needs of women or gender discrimination. In a social justice approach, you can't say that maybe you're about advocating for women's rights, but you're not concerned with the plight of people of color. Or you can't say that you're about the plight of people of color, but you're not concerned with individuals with diverse abilities, with disabilities. You can't say that you're about serving individuals with disabilities, but you don't care about the homeless. You can't say that you care about the homeless, but you don't care about the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals. And so you see in social work, our responsibility is to serve all marginalized populations, honoring the dignity of that individual. Does that mean that we always fully understand the perspectives of our marginalized groups or that we even agree with some of the circumstances? It does not. But what it means is that professionally, we engage and we recognize that everyone is built in with an inherent dignity from the Christian perspective. Genesis 1:27, when we are created in God's image, and therefore we honor the dignity of that individual with serving them with everything that we've got. And so for that reason, this class is rooted in social justice, and we do not take a buffet approach, right, in our work of serving individuals in need. So why social justice? Why are we so focused on social justice for this class? Well, as social workers, we believe that we are responsible, not just called to, but responsible to serve, heal, and love our neighbor. And you know what? That means every neighbor. This is what's so difficult, right? I worked the majority of my caseloads in child welfare, right? And that meant that I worked with victims of trauma, the children, right, who had grown up in abusive or sometimes traumatic circumstances and environments. But you know what that also means? That over years of serving those who had been abused, it means that I also served individuals who had done the abusing themselves, right? Convicted child molesters, individuals who had engaged in intimate partner violence, right? Who had done harm to others. Social workers, like I said, I could not take that buffet approach where I was willing to help one person, but willing to let someone else go. And so we recognize that from birth, right? We are physically connected from one human being to another. That is life. Think about that. And even though that umbilical cord is cut right after we are born, that connection never stops. We remain permanently reliant upon one another for our success. Think about this, right? You go to the hospital because you're not feeling well. The electricity in the hospital, the running water, the internet connection, the computers that the doctors are looking up your diagnosis, all of these other things. You are dependent upon at least 14 other people just to make that doctor's appointment happen, right? For you to be seen and to receive treatment. We are dependent upon one another from birth, and it doesn't stop, right? There's a saying in our field that hurt people hurt people. And what that means is that if we don't break the cycle of trauma, of neglect, of abuse within individuals and communities, those individuals may go forth and perpetrate and cause further harm to others in society. So what is our goal as social workers is to serve everyone in need so that we can create not only a healthy individual, but healthier communities, right, that are thriving. We have to serve those who have been hurt as well as who have done the hurting. Like I said before, in my experience, serving both sides of the spectrum. We have to begin shifting our thinking from what's that person's problem to maybe what caused them to behave that way. I know sometimes that's difficult, right? Think about when you're driving on the freeway. You get on the freeway and you're driving along in your lane and someone comes up on the side of you and all of a sudden, whoom, they cut you off, right? And they cut you off and you have this moment of instinct where you're like, hello, I was driving here. Why did you cut me off, right? And you kind of do the hand gesture. And then while you're driving, you put your hands back on the wheel, you look at the driver in front of you, and they decide to give you a hand gesture, right? Maybe involving a finger, right? And that hand gesture is not too nice. And what happens at that point, right? You get upset, and then maybe you choose to co-communicate using that same hand gesture, indicating that you see them and you're sending them the same one. And then what happens? What do we see in society? The two individuals engage in this road rage, right? They're speeding up and down the freeway. They decide to get off the freeway at the same time. They get out of the cars, and what do? They start throwing blows, right? The reality of the situation is, as social workers, as Christians, we have to take a different approach. Rather than look at that driver that cut us off and say, what's their problem, right? Don't they see that I'm driving here and get upset about it? We have to begin to shift our mode of thought to consider what led them to behave that way. Why are they such in a rush? Why are they so upset? Maybe that person just lost their job. Maybe that person just lost a loved one is coming from the hospital. Maybe that person is rushing off to the hospital to say goodbye to a person, right, that's not going to be around very soon. We don't know what's going on in that person's mind, and therefore we can't be quick to judge, right, what other people are going through. So this is why we focus on social justice. Now, I want to share with you then, this notion of social justice comes from a larger conversation about this concept of oneness. Social workers believe that individuals are linked to communities. Communities are linked to the meso level, which is systems like cities, counties, and states. And then at the macro level, we're all connected as countries, and we're all connected on a global human rights sort of stage. And so this notion of connectiveness is nothing new. In fact, for centuries and centuries, many different cultures have had beliefs, right? Ideas about connectedness and human nature that lend themselves to be very applicable to social work practice. And so this class, even though we're going to be talking about different populations that have historically been marginalized, our real focus is going to be on this notion that even though we are different, we are still intimately connected. Let me share with you really quickly some sort of multicultural thoughts on this concept of connectedness. There's a saying in South Africa. It's actually a saying and a philosophy called Ubuntu. And what Ubuntu means is I am because we are. That's literally what it means. But it speaks to a larger philosophy in South Africa that believes that a person can really only become a fully adjusted, high-functioning person through the interactions and presence of other people. That we rely on people to grow and to become better and to transform. And it's through people, interacting with people, that we become our best, highest functioning examples of like human beings, okay? In Mayan philosophy, there's a saying called In Lak'ech Halaken, which literally means I am another you as you are another me. And what the Mayan philosophy believed was that everyone, right, on some level, had they grown up with a certain circumstances or environment, could have been someone else in those circumstances. So when the Maya saw someone who was struggling or who was less privileged or less fortunate as them, they didn't judge the person and say that that person did nothing with their life and that's why they're in those circumstances. Instead, what the Maya understood was, wow, that person's going through a really rough time and I could have easily been that person, right? Had it not been for the loving relationships or whatever it was of people investing in me. Think about this when we talk about the unhoused and individuals who find themselves in homeless situations. Some people may look at an individual and say, look at they're homeless. Why won't they just get a job? Why won't they do A, B, and C? From a social work perspective, if we're aligned with this theory of connectedness and this Mayan philosophy, we understand the complexities of housing and the shortage of housing, right, in our nation, in fact, and globally. We understand that if we saw someone who is homeless on the street, we realize, gosh, if I'm middle class, I'm living one paycheck to the next. One huge medical bill, one fire, my house being burned down or flooded, I could be that person, right, in a very short period of time without any support systems or people to help me when I need it. That's the difference in our social work understanding of connectedness. In Buddhism, there's a notion of Sangha, and Sangha is really a community of learners, of thinkers who build a connectedness in something greater than themselves. They don't get together to boost each other's ego, to brag about how many degrees they have or how enlightened they are, but rather they come together and say, how do we use the gifts that we've been given, the education that we've invested in, so that we may contribute to something larger than ourselves, to better the situations of others. The San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, just right down the freeway there, right? They have a saying called Yawa, Yawa. And Yawa is literally means to act on one's belief. But what it actually means is that our humanity, if you will, our culture, our norms, our values are passed down from one generation to another, and therefore we are all connected, right? I'm connected to my great-grandparents because the oral traditions and the history have been passed down and taught to me from my ancestors. And so we are both intimately connected as individuals and even from the tribal perspective. Mother Teresa, the great Mother Teresa, had said, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to one another. I think that this quote is so appropriate and powerful, right? It's when we find ourselves, right, in the most fear, hate, arguing, right, anger, that we forget that we are all children of God. Right? Father Greg Boyle, founder of Homeboy Industries, had said, there is no us and them, there's just us. And my favorite quote on connectedness actually comes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right, who said, all I am saying is simply this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Therefore, whatever impacts one directly affects all others indirectly. What a beautiful example of understanding that we are all intimately connected, okay? So what I'm going to do next is I want to share some quotes that really highlight this notion of social justice, different themes from this concept of social justice, and this mindset of being connected, of interconnectedness. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is just go really quickly through some quotes and highlight, right, how they pertain to social work and this notion of connectedness. Dr. King had said, we must live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools, right? We are all impacted by one another's decisions and actions. We think at times that we operate independently of one another, but the reality is if one person is unhealthy in our community, our whole community is unhealthy. Maya Angelou had said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. This goes back to honoring the inherent dignity, right, and the human rights of every individual, no matter what background they're coming from or how different they are from us. At the end of the day, people are going to remember you as a social worker, and they're not going to always remember what you said, and they're not going to always remember the amazing case plan that you developed, but what they are going to remember is how you treated them, how you made them feel, how you listened to them when they were in need, how you were there to support them. Mother Teresa said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples, right? What a beautiful thought. If you were to look at the enormity of the needs of the world, right? What social workers are trying to tackle: war, poverty, famine, institutional racism, intimate partner violence, right? Refugees and migration. It becomes overwhelming. Some people may think, how could I ever make a difference? Me, one person, in changing the world. Mother Teresa said, you can't do it alone. But what you can do is you can go out, right, and dedicate your life to serving those who are in front of you every day. And if everyone collectively engages in that work, the world is transformed, okay? So you are contributing to that, and that's why I'm so honored that you have chosen the career of social work. JFK had said the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened, right? Again, this collective mentality, right, that we are all impacted by one another. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian, Lutheran minister that was actually murdered in World War II. He was sentenced to hang by Adolf Hitler and imprisoned by Adolf Hitler, had said, if I sit next to a madman as he drives a car into a group of innocent bystanders, I cannot, as a Christian, simply wait for the catastrophe, then comfort the wounded and bury the dead. I must try to wrestle the steering wheel out of the hands of the driver. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about this notion that aligns with social justice of social responsibility. That as Christians, as social workers, we believe that we cannot actively sit and watch individuals be harmed through either oppressive systems, legislation, funding, war, famine, conflict, whatever the case is. That as social workers and as Christians, we are compelled to actively participate in alleviating the suffering of the world. This is what we are called to do as social workers. Michelle Obama has said, as women, we must stand up for ourselves. As women, we must stand up for each other. As women, we must stand up for justice for all. Justice for all. Do you hear? We cannot take that buffet approach to seeking justice for everyone. Mahatma Gandhi had said, an eye for an eye ends up making the whole world blind. This is an important quote that I think applies especially today, right? In a day where we are so politically divided, economically divided, even regionally divided in so many important decisions about our country, about our communities, about the world, if we all sought retribution, which is revenge, if we all sought to get even with one another, right, all we will be doing is perpetuating more harm, hurt people, hurting people. And so this is a warning from Gandhi, right? If all we want is retribution, if we're not trying to seek restoration, oneness, connectedness, then all we're doing is perpetuating harm. And as social workers, it's the last thing that we want to do. Bell Hooks had said, being oppressed means the absence of choices. We're going to talk about oppression and privilege a little bit tonight in this class. And so we'll elaborate on that more. And finally, Winston Churchill had said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. I think it's a beautiful quote because one of the things that you have committed to is a career of service to others, right? And so you, in some level, although you want a career and you want to live a certain lifestyle and all of those things, that may be important to you, but what you ultimately recognize is what's most important to you at the end of the day is the difference that you make in this world. Okay, so you're making a life by what you're giving to others. I'm going to tell you a story for a moment because the social justice mentality that we have here is really important, okay? It's why we're spending time in Social Work 530 educating you, right, on this concept of social work and social justice. Jemar Tisby, who's the author of this book, The Color of Compromise, amazing book if you have an opportunity to read it, had once said, education must lead to liberation. The acquisition of knowledge should not result in a personal enlightenment, but also the alleviation of oppression, right? So when we think about this, I'd like us to really consider we're spending time, you're spending 2 years of your life studying, right? In this case, marginalized populations, and for what purpose? For the MSW? Yes, but there's a larger purpose behind that. So that you may take that MSW, you may take your education, and you may go out and liberate those who have known only oppression. You may give a voice to those who have only known silence. To do that, right, to really commit your life to alleviating oppression is not an easy task. There's going to feel like days where you are the only person that seems to be standing up for an individual or community when no one else sees the value. At times, you're going to feel like you're on an island. I want to share a story with you that is a really powerful story that connects well to your future careers as social workers. And I want to do it by showing you a historic photo really quickly, okay? So I'm going to put this photo up on the screen. And as you see on the screen, this is a historic photo. This photo was taken on June 13th, actually, of 1936. June 13th of 1936. And if you notice on the screen, you see a lot of folks from the beginning of, before the onset of World War II, that are doing the salute, right, to Hitler. And some of them have some military uniforms on. You can see some military uniforms here and here on the screen, right? And they're all pointing in this direction off to the left of your screen. On the left of your screen, which you wouldn't be able to see in this photo, was a German ship, a warship that was being commissioned in 1936. It was going to go off and serve in the German military. And Hitler had actually arrived at the dock for this ship to see the launch and the commission of this ship as it was being sent off into the ocean. He mandated that all of the citizens who were in the area that day, including military personnel, would arrive to celebrate, okay, the commission of this ship, and they needed to salute him when he stood up on the podium, which was off to the left over here. And so when this picture was taken was at that moment when Hitler was beginning to speak and everyone was going in the process of saluting him prior to the beginning. Now, I want to point your direction, if you can follow my cursor, over to one in particular person in this seat. This guy right here. Look at him. Look at his face. Look at his arms. Do you see his arms are crossed? Step back and let's step back and not look at him anymore and look at this vast sea of everyone saluting, right? Everyone here pledging their allegiance to Hitler except for this one man. This one man's name is August Landmesser. August Landmesser. And I want to share the story about August Landmesser right here. August Landmesser was a German, okay? A German who, before Hitler came to power, fell in love with a Jewish woman, okay? And he fell in love with this Jewish woman, and when Hitler took power, he started to put a number of orders in place. One of those orders was obviously banning the marriage between Germans and non-Germans in order to preserve what Hitler believed was the Aryan or the superior race, okay? So he didn't want mixing of genes. And so their love literally became illegal. Well, August Landmesser chose to marry the Jewish woman, and they did that, illegally, underground. And when it was discovered that they were married, August Landmesser was thrown in jail, and the woman was taken away, never to be seen from again. Historians believe that she was later probably sent to a death camp, where she was one of the millions that experienced the genocide of the Holocaust during that time. When August Landmesser was released from jail for marrying a Jewish woman, he was sent to the front lines of the war and he was killed in combat. The reason I bring this up is because at times in your social work career, you may feel like August Landmesser. August Landmesser decided to renounce Hitler's power. He wasn't buying into the message that Hitler was placing. And he forebode, right, for himself, saluting Hitler because he believed that what Hitler was doing was unjust. But look at all around him. Look at the hundreds of individuals that were going with the flow, saying, even if I don't agree, I'm going to go through the process. I'm going to salute Hitler. I'm going to show up. I'm going to play the game because maybe I'm worried about what other people will think of me if I say I don't agree. I'm worried what will happen to me if I don't show up to this rally. I wonder what will happen to me and my family if I don't give this salute. And so it was easier for the masses to go along with this, right, than to stand in opposition for something that they believed was inherently wrong, that it violated the human rights of individuals. At times in your career, you will be the one person standing up for justice, even when everyone else seems compelled to say, just go along with it. It'll pass eventually, okay? And what that takes is courage and respect and a focus on human rights, right? Okay, so let's get into the meat of some definitions here for marginalized populations, what we're really about. What is a marginalized population? By definition, a marginalized population is a group of people that are excluded from, full participation in society. So marginalizations includes the withholding of political rights, economic opportunities, or social integration. Let me kind of break that down for you because I know that's a really academic and sort of academic term or definition, okay? If you were to look at society as a piece of college ruled paper, let me go forward, as a piece of college ruled paper like this, okay? And what you saw was everyone in the middle was all of your what's considered mainstream populations in society, okay? Those are the individuals that are generally accepted. They're folded completely into society. All of the laws are built to support them, to help them, to benefit them. No one thinks anything about these groups. It's just normal, would be here in the middle. Any of the groups that are on the outskirts of that, that are seen as abnormal, different in some way, that are treated differently, legislated differently, funded differently, would go to the outskirts of this paper, the margins. They're pushed from the inside to the outside. They're pushed to the margins. Those are our marginalized groups. That is the process of marginalization, pushing people, communities that are different from us, groups, to the outskirts of acceptance of society. So let's go back and look at this. If you notice then, in the middle here, based off of United States culture, because it will look different depending on the culture, the country that you're in, right, for a dominant group. But for a dominant group, in the middle would be all of your dominant, your mainstream groups. Those that are young, typically below the age of 50, able-bodied individuals that don't rely on a wheelchair, right? Or have a cognitive disorder or something like that. If you're able-minded, right? A Christian, European descent, middle class, heterosexual, American-born, meaning a citizen, a patriarchy, which is a male, right? You would fit well into society because most of, generally in the US, our laws, our structure, and everything is aligned with that group. What we start to see then is that where people would fall out of that are people in these groups here. For example, historically, people of color, those in low socioeconomic status, women, the LGBTQ plus community, non-Christians, people over 40, I would even say people over 50 in this case, people with diverse abilities. All of these individuals would fall outside of the dominant group. And historically, what we've seen legislatively, economically, all of these things, that those groups have been pushed to the margins of society. When we treat people differently based off of their identity, we call that discrimination. That's the term that we use. Discrimination is just treating people differently, acting on our prejudice of seeing someone as different. And so we refer to those as the isms in social work, okay? So when we treat someone different based off of their age, we call that ageism. When we treat someone different based off of their able-bodiedness, we call that ableism. When we treat someone different based off of their race, we call that racism. If we treat someone different based off class, classism, and so on and so forth, right? And so our job as social work professionals is to combat the isms. What we're trying to do is find a common ground. Remember, a connectedness, rather than pushing people away and blaming people and saying, you've done harm to a group, shame on you, you deserve to suffer. As social workers, what we say is, no, let's take a look historically of what has happened. We've left some groups behind, right? We want to make sure these groups are fully incorporated, fully accepted into society. So I want us to be able to come to a place where we see one another and our policies, our laws, our funding, our economics, they all align with seeing and honoring the dignity of every human being. That is what we're trying to do as social work human rights advocates. That's what we're combating, are these isms in marginalized populations, okay? Now, I've given you this secular social work approach to this notion of what we're trying to do as social workers, of really serving those who are on the margins. We spend most of our time as social workers serving everyone who has been pushed right to the outskirts, these margins of society. I'd like to blend that now with a Christian worldview, okay? What I ultimately believe supersedes even that of our social work calling on a professional level, our code of ethics, is that we are Christians. And from a Christian world perspective, all of Jesus' ministry was running to the margins. Think about where Jesus spent his time, where he ate, where he slept, who he talked to. He spent so much time talking to those who were seen as adulterers, tax collectors, criminals, the poor, the sick, women. And what he did was, in his ministry, is he ran to the margins. That is what you are doing as a Christian social worker. You are spending your career running to the margins, not only because you have an ethical responsibility to do so, but you have a spiritual responsibility as well. There's a beautiful scripture verse that talks about this notion of running to the margins of our role as social workers that I think sums it up very well. And it comes to us from Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 10 through 11. In Jeremiah, it says, you are going to look at this place, these empty and desolate towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, and say, it's a wasteland, unlivable. Not even a dog could live here. It goes on to say in Jeremiah, but the time is coming when you're going to hear laughter and celebration, marriage festivities, people exclaiming, thank God of the angel armies. He's so good. His love never quits, as they bring thank offerings into God's temple. Jeremiah then goes on to say, I'll restore everything that was lost in this land. I'll make everything as good as new. I, God, say so. Think about that for a moment. You are running to the margins of society, where to the poor, to the vulnerable, to those with disabilities, to migrants and refugees, to those who have historically been treated differently because of who they are, they can say, from my perspective, this world is so painful. It's unlivable. Not even a dog would want to live in my reality. And what you are doing as a Christian social worker is going forth to the margins, and you are saying, I see you differently. I don't see you the way that your neighbors, right, who have done harm to you, see you. I see you as God sees you. I see you as a child of God. I see you as worthy of dignity, of love, of services, and I'm bringing you hope, okay? And so from a religious perspective, you are doing more than just providing services. You are running to the margins, participating in this restorative perspective of God's promise that he will make everything as good as new. To go along with that theme, then, what we're doing as social workers is recognizing that we want to find a place for everyone. There's a poem by Edward Markham that says, he drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win, we drew a circle that took him in. Do you see this? Do you see that the focus of this poem is not that I'm right, you're wrong, right? It's not I'm rich, you're poor, citizen, non-citizen, Republican, Democrat, male, female, able-bodied, disabled, own a mansion, homeless, citizen, non-citizen. If you see here, the idea behind our approach as social workers is to engage in a process of inclusivity, where we find common ground with everyone, where we believe that there is a place for everyone in society, and we use love to circle, to broaden that circle, okay? Finally, to end, this conversation just on this discussion about running to the margins, right? Our Christian responsibility. There's a picture here right on the screen that shows, back in the 1800s when settlers were being attacked, let's say by like native tribes in this area when they were moving west, it was common practice for these settlers to circle the wagons, was what it was called. They would circle their horses and their wagons, and you see they would be in the circle here to protect themselves from the ongoing attack. This is a representation of where we kind of are in society today. Everyone's really circling the wagons, right? Everyone's afraid of being canceled, afraid of being judged, afraid of being belittled, afraid of being called names for their beliefs. And what we're saying is, I don't want to step out. I don't want to take any risk. I don't want to worry anyone. I don't want anyone to be upset with me. So I'm just going to like close myself up. You stay on your side, I stay on mine, and we could just live separate lives. The problem is with Christianity, authentic Christianity, we recognize we cannot live separate from our neighbor. We are created as children of God. We are equal in God's eyes, and he's asking us to engage, right, in loving one another. So authentic Christianity is not about circling the wagons. It's not about saying I'm staying in my camp of this political background or this economic structure or these laws, but rather it's saying, no, I want to widen the circle. I want to step out, right, into the world, and I want to create this place of, imagine a circle of compassion where there's no one standing outside that circle, okay? All right. Now, a couple of quick terms that I want to dive into, and then we'll be moving towards wrapping up the lecture for today. There's a couple of terms that I want to establish. The one that I'm going to talk about next is called privilege, okay? Now, privilege and right, these definitions often get mixed up, and sometimes they kind of get jumbled together, but there's actually some very specific definitions that distinguish the two. So a right, for example, is a moral legal entitlement to have or obtain something, right? So a right is something that's written in, it's giving you a moral or legal entitlement, and that you are owed that right. Now, a privilege is something different. A privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity gained or available only to a particular person or group of people. Not everyone gets the privilege, okay? Everyone may get a right, not everyone gets the privilege, and privileges are special. They're reserved for certain groups, okay? The reason I want to spend time on this is because social workers do something where they recognize and they look for where is privilege and oppression prevalent, okay, in societal structures, and how do we begin to advocate for privilege, right, to be fanned out, to be shared, to be distributed to all groups? How do we prevent certain groups from being denied privileges in societal context? Okay, that's what we do as social workers. But the term privilege nowadays, especially in today's polarized society, can really get some negative attention, right? It's almost like people are flinging the word privilege as an insult. You'll hear people say, well, that's your privilege talking, or you're so privileged, and it can hurt sometimes. People will hear that and say, are you insulting me because I'm privileged? Like, is it wrong? Is it bad that I'm privileged? And it can be something that is it's losing the definition that was really intended to capture, okay? So I want to get us back to basics. When we talk about privilege as social workers, we're not talking about privilege as it's often noted in social media or on news outlets and things like this, where it's flung as a insult, okay? Let's talk about the definitions of privilege and oppression from a social work perspective. Oppression means that is the process by which individuals from historically higher status groups unknowingly or unwittingly, with or without any conscious effort of their parts, utilize the entitlements inherent to their status, thus perpetuating a status quo in which individuals from other groups have, by definition, lower status with fewer attendant opportunities. What this means is oppression is when individuals, sometimes without even knowing it, deny privilege to other groups. Sometimes it's intentional, which we've seen historically through, let's say, slavery, the Holocaust, periods of war, right? And things like this, where governments have said, no, we are denying access to certain groups legally. But sometimes oppression occurs when an individual doesn't even realize it. Privilege is when you think something's not a problem for you because it's not a problem for you personally, right? So I'm going to explain that in a second, and I'm going to give you an example. Let me give you a really concrete example of this, okay? So a lot of times, like I said, when we talk about privilege and oppression, people get worked up and they said, oh gosh, this is like, going to be some liberal talk, or someone's going to say that it's an insult because I'm privileged, or I don't understand what it's like to work hard because I've got privilege, or they're even assuming that I never worked hard a day in my life because they just called me privileged. But in a social work context, privilege means something different. Let me give you an analogy. So, you ever been on a walk on the beach? I want you to think about this for a second. You ever been on a walk on the beach on a nice breezy day? And you're out there and you're enjoying the waves and you're walking along the sand and the wind is at your back. Imagine for a second that the wind is at your back. Close your eyes and you're walking down the beach. The wind's blowing at your back and you're just enjoying the sound of the ocean and the waves. Privilege is when the wind is at your back. See, you're moving from point A to point B, yeah? But when the wind is at your back, it's helping you along in your journey. It's lightening your steps. When you get to your destination, right, you've exerted less energy. You haven't had to put as much effort forth just because you've had the wind to push you along the way. That's privilege. Now imagine that you turn around on that beach and you start to head back to where you came from. And now the wind isn't at your back anymore. The wind is at your face. That's oppression. Oppression is the wind in your face. See, you can get from point A to point B if you've been oppressed, if the wind is in your face, but what's different about your experience? Every step takes more energy. Every step you are pushing against a force that is pushing back against you. Can you get to your destination? Yes. But when you get there, you're exhausted, you're tired, you've put forth more effort, right, than when the wind was at your back. Privilege is the wind at our back, oppression is at the wind in our face. And there are times in our lives where often we've had a little bit of both. There are times in our life where where privilege, the wind has been at my back. And then there have been times where privilege, the wind, has been in my face. When we have the ability to reflect on our own privilege and our own oppression, not depression, our own oppression that has existed in our lives, in social work, that's actually a process that we have a name for, okay? Recognizing where our privilege and oppression has played out in our lives so that we can see where it plays out for others. That is called checking our privilege. checking our privilege, okay? When we check our privilege, we understand that there have been times where the wind has been in our back, and we understand where the times has wind has been in our face. I'm going to give you an example of how I would check my privilege, okay, for myself. I am a male, okay, so I fall in that dominant group of being a male. I'm middle class. I'm Christian. I'm cisgender, meaning identify as the gender that was provided to me at birth, that was noted for me at birth. I am able-bodied. I'm a heterosexual. So out of all of these here, these are all of my privilege, right? And so those are the privileges. Now, when I also recognize, though, that there have been times when wind is at my face, I also recognize I'm a person of color. Okay. I recognize that I'm heavy set. So that's sizeism is what we call it when people are treated differently because of size, right? I recognize that I am not rich, right? I'm not wealthy. So I am not in a higher socioeconomic status. Okay. Those would be my oppressed groups. So if you notice, if someone were to say to me, Dr. Mexico, you are privileged, should I get upset for that? No, not at all, because they're not wrong. There are moments where the wind has been in my back. I have been privileged. But if someone were to say you've only been privileged and you've never experienced oppression, well, that's not entirely true either, because there are certain parts about my identity where the wind has or continues to be in my face. So what I want to encourage us to consider as social workers, remember, new ideas is what I bring forward to you all. Let's not prescribe to the definition of privilege that we see in social media or in mainstream news. Privilege does not have to be an insult. Privilege is a fact. Some of us have it. We've all been in privileged groups at some point or the other, but we've also been in oppressed groups, and we don't want to deny that experience of others as well. Finally, when we recognize that we do participate or are part of certain privileged groups, what we want to be able to do is use our privilege, okay, to advance, right, the circumstances of others, to advocate for others. So when I recognize where I come from and where the wind is at my back, it makes me a better advocate and use my resources and my connections to benefit others. Privilege is never, and it shouldn't be used as an insult. It's simply understanding where our identities and the groups that we identify with play a role in our experiences in life, okay? Now, I'm going to encourage you to consider, because you're going to have a paper on this as one of your assignments, what are the dominant groups you belong to? So really quickly, for your assignment, you're going to be reflecting on what groups you belong to. So you're going to be checking your privilege. Let me go back to that slide. So what groups do you belong to? Do you belong to these dominant groups here, right? Or do you maybe belong to some vulnerable groups, right? The oppressed groups, the marginalized groups here, okay? And so what you're going to want to do, let me go back to that slide again, is you want to be able to spend some time reflecting on, what are your dominant groups and where are your marginalized groups, your oppressed groups, right? Similar to how I checked my privilege, you're going to be doing that for your paper. So I just wanted to prime you for that, okay? Now, thank you for sticking with me. I know this has been a long lecture and I'm almost done. We're in the home stretch, okay? So hang with me. You're doing great. So let me see here. One of the unfortunate perks that we have about privilege, okay, when we have it and we haven't checked it. So individuals, like if you're not practicing social work and you don't realize that you have this privilege, is it can lead to you behaving in ways that can sometimes feel condescending, insensitive, either sexist or racist or all of these other things without us even realizing it. It's not because the person is inherently this bad person. It's just that they haven't had the opportunity to explore where the wind has been at their face or where the wind has been at their back, and they may say some things unintentionally that can be harmful to others. So when I gave that definition of privilege and said sometimes privilege is the failure to see that it's a problem because it's not a problem for us, think about that, even just when you have a chance to visit our campus, right? I'm able-bodied, I'm not dependent upon a walker or wheelchair to move around campus. And so if someone were to ask me and I didn't check my privilege and say, hey, do you see any need to improve some of the, circumstances or accessibility on campus? I might say to myself, no, I get around campus just fine, right? But if I were to ask someone from the perspective who was relying upon a wheelchair or crutches, what it was like to get around campus, they may have a different perspective. They may say, hey, there's a lot of stairs in these old buildings, and some of the elevators are kind of creaky, they work, sometimes they don't, and it's really difficult for me to make it to class on time or to navigate through these spaces. Again, my privilege, it doesn't mean that I was a bad person. It doesn't mean I was trying to forget about individuals with diverse abilities, but if I don't experience those challenges every day, we may unintentionally forget about a group because it's not a problem for us. Social workers, we want to maintain that focus, right, on seeing everyone and seeing what their reality is, or at least trying to understand it so we can better advocate for them. Okay? How do we do that? How do we advocate for individuals who have historically been marginalized? One term, which is important to know, is called social empathy. Social empathy. Social workers use social empathy, which is really defined as the ability to more deeply understand people by perceiving or experiencing their life situations, and as a result, gain insight into the structural inequalities and disparities. Empathy, the definition of empathy means feeling with people. If you as a social worker can feel with your client, maybe you don't understand their background. Maybe you don't come from the same background as them. But if you can tap into where is their common understanding, for example, the individual is relying upon a wheelchair to get around campus. What does that feel like? How frustrating is it to try to get somewhere and be unable to, especially when you're running behind? So maybe you're not in a wheelchair, but maybe you know what it's like, right? To feel frustrated and trying to get somewhere and be limited in your ability to do so. That is where you feel with the client. And when you can feel with the client, then you can start to understand how their world, how they experience their world on a broader network every day, and how structural inequalities or disparities may exist. So what could we do as a social worker to demonstrate social empathy for the individual who has a diverse ability? We can start to connect them with resources on campus. We can maybe have conversations with committees or departmental leaders about how we can get more accessibility to buildings on campus. Where are there opportunities to renovate? Where are there opportunities to raise funds for building and renovations and all of that, right? And so social empathy is a tool that we use as social workers to advance our work in human rights issues. Finally, I want to leave you with a couple of things here, right? So with marginalized populations, you are entering into this field of social work, right? And this field of social work really is the activity of helping individuals, groups, or communities to enhance or restore their capacity for social functioning and to create societal conditions favorable to their goals. That is what you are doing, creating conditions for success, for thriving, right? And so part of our attachment in this course is what we want to be able to do is look upon marginalized populations and say, I didn't realize maybe that this individual or this group was struggling the way they were. And now that I see it, how can I engage in social work practice, right? Was applying my values, my principles, my techniques, right, to help those in need. Okay, whether that's through therapy, whether that's through legislation and policy, economics, but how do we change that reality for individuals? Okay. Finally, in terms of our calling for social work, our work as social workers from a Christian perspective aligns beautifully with Matthew chapter 25 through verses 35 through 40, when the apostles, were having a conversation with Jesus and he was talking to them about the need to serve. And so he says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me, and I was in prison and you came to visit me. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you did for me, right? That is our quest as social workers, right? To do all of these things. And what's mostly important is to understand is that Jesus' ministry was focused on running to the margins, seeing the inherent God-given dignity in every human being, and being compelled, right, with social empathy to act upon those beliefs. That is our calling as Christian social workers. Finally, I've got literally just a couple more slides for you and we're closing out, right? I've talked about this God-given dignity. I've talked about this notion of seeing people the way God sees them. What does that all look like, right? Is that just a bunch of mumbo jumbo that Dr. Mexico is sharing, or is there really something to it? Well, there's really something to it. In Genesis 1:27, we know this notion of, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, right? God creates mankind, man and woman, in his own image. We refer to that in the spiritual sense, in the theological sense, as what we call the Imago Dei. Imago Dei is just Latin for the image of God, literally imago, image, Dei, like deity, God, the Imago Dei. And so Christians recognize that it is our responsibility to see others as God sees others and to honor the inherent dignity in every human being. Before we wrap up the lecture today, I want to show you one video of what it looks like, right? To honor every single person and to see them as God sees them in this form of the Imago Dei. So I'm going to show you this really quick video. Let me bring down the old video. Perfect. And then I will share this with you and then we'll wrap up our lesson. All right, here we go. Perfect.
It's so easy to place people in boxes, drawing lines, creating sides. There's us, and there's them. Those we feel comfortable around, and those we don't. There are those of us with many chapters, and those just starting their own stories. There's the well-to-do, and those doing what they can. There are those we share something with, and those we don't seem to share anything with.
Welcome, and thank you for coming today, guys. Today I'm going to be conducting an experiment where I'll ask you a series of questions. Now, these questions will be very personal questions, and for us to get a true result, I need you to be completely honest with how you respond. The first question I have is, who in here was the class clown? Who is never on time?
And then there's us, we who have tattoos. We who feel lonely. We who have been bullied. We who have bullied others. We who are madly in love. We who have overcome great adversity. And there's the lucky ones, whose team won the championship this year. We who beat cancer. then, there's all of us who are created in the image of God. And as one body, we stand together, united as one under His grace.
All right. I wanted to share that with you because I thought it's a beautiful example, right, of this notion of what our commitment is as social workers, particularly as Christian social workers, when we say that we see people as God sees them. In the background of this screen, you see these silos, right? What are silos built to do? To keep things separate from one another, right? They're meant to divide, to separate, to segregate. But as Christians, as social workers, we recognize we are all created in the image of God, and therefore none of these silos apply. The boxes that we put each other in based off of our age, our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, our religion, our geographic location, our language, our citizenship, all of these other things, they don't mean anything to God. God sees us as His child, worthy of His love, worthy of His redemption. And that is what we are called to do as Christian social workers, to go forth, to run to the margins, to serve those who are marginalized for the sake of glorifying God. And so I wanted to share that with you just to kind of drive home this fact. Rather than this focus on all the divisions, on all the silos of what makes us different, rather than get upset at why we're different and what we look and all the space in between, we as social workers focus on the fact that we are all intimately connected on a spiritual level, okay? Finally, I want to tell you one last story, and then we're going to close out our lesson for today. And it's this story that comes to us about Mother Teresa. It's a story that I learned long ago that helped me throughout my career in terms of this notion of being a Christian social worker, right? And glorifying God in all we do. Mother Teresa's here on the right. And as you can see, she's depicted here and because of later in her life as this older woman, right? She's small, she appears to be frail, and she's here in a leper colony. So in Calcutta, lepers were pushed to the margins, literally marginalized, right, because of their health and because of the disease that they were battling. And so lepers here were pushed to leper colonies, and they were referred to as the untouchables, that no one in society would touch or interact with them because they were seen as less than. And you could see these lepers, if you look closely in the screen, they're missing fingers, right, from their leprosy, the digits. Mother Teresa would go to the leper colonies in Calcutta, and she would pray, and she would bring food and supplies and healthcare along with her group of nuns, right, that were serving, and they would go and serve the poor in Calcutta. And by all accounts, Mother Teresa was very small, very short, very frail, maybe 95 pounds, soaking wet. Right? But people often mistook Mother Teresa just because she was small as that she was like submissive and passive. But the real people that knew Mother Teresa actually knew that she was forced to be reckoned with. She had an opinion of her own, and she was not scared to speak her mind, right, to individuals. Well, one day there was this reporter who was a journalist who was following Mother Teresa around the leper colony as she was doing her work to document her work working with the poor in Calcutta. And this journalist was a little snarky, right? And he was following Mother Teresa around, and Mother Teresa was going through the leper colony, and she was putting hands on the lepers, laying hands on the lepers, and she was praying with them, right? And she was asking God to bless them. And she's in the midst of reaching to touch one of the lepers as she was about to pray. And when she touched the leper, the journalist said, "Wow, I wouldn't touch a leper for $1 million," right? Mother Teresa stopped cold in her tracks, stopped her prayer, turned around, looked at the journalist, and said, "I wouldn't touch a leper if it was for a matter of $1 million either." She said, "But for God, I touch lepers every day. For God, I touch lepers every day." Think about that for a moment. What is going to distinguish you in your career in serving marginalized populations in your social work career is not your MSW education, right? Because other people are going to have MSW degrees. It's not going to be the theories you learn, because other people are going to learn those theories too. It's not going to be the number of hours you put in because other people did those same number of hours. What's going to distinguish you in your career is why you are living your purpose as a social worker. Are you doing it for your own personal gain, or are you doing it to glorify God? The social workers that are using their work, their God-given talents, right? Their ability every day to glorify God in all they do are able to go beyond, right? Just working with other individuals. They'll be able to reach farther, go longer, burn out less, because they're not doing their work for them. They're doing their work for God. And for God, you will be able to go forth and touch all of the lepers of society. What do I mean by that? The lepers are not just literally the ones with leprosy. The lepers, the outcasts, the untouchables of society are refugees and immigrants, the incarcerated, right? The foster child, the orphan, the woman who has been in abusive relationships, the woman who has been human trafficked, right? The LGBTQ plus individual, right? The poor, the homeless. You will go forth and you will touch lepers, not because you are motivated by money, but because you are motivated by God. And so I want to leave you with that today. Finally, I promise we're almost done here. At the end of each class, we're going to end with an activity, a spiritual activity called centering. Centering is a form of prayer. You don't need to know the Bible left and right in order to center. You don't have to have it memorized, right? All you need to do is be in a quiet place and focus on God's presence in a particular moment. So if you've heard of mindfulness, if you've heard of meditation, then you've also heard of centering. Centering is the Christian version of meditation, of mindfulness, okay? And so centering is actually an ancient form of prayer in our Christian tradition that came from this guy, Brother Lawrence, in the 15th century, who was a lay brother who served in the Carmelite monastery in Paris, France, okay? So this is an old school tradition of prayer in our Christian heritage. Now, Brother Lawrence first realized this presence of God when one day he was going on a walk, and it was transitioning from late winter, early spring. So he was going on this walk in the morning. All of the bushes were like frozen, right? And it seemed like life was still asleep, like it was dead, right? Because it was still winter time, just spring was approaching. And on this frozen bush, Brother Lawrence saw one bud starting to bloom from this one bush, even though everything around him seemed solid, frozen solid and cold and hostile. And in that moment, he reflected on the fact that even in the midst of what seems to be a sleep or a death of nature, God was still present in all of that. And from that moment, Brother Lawrence keyed into this fact that God is present in every single moment of every single action of everything that we do every day. The church later saw that there was an advantage to this form of recognition of what was described as the perpetual practice of the presence of God, the practice of recognizing that God is continuously and constantly present in all we do, and everything that Brother Lawrence did thereforth was to glorify God in all he did. In fact, Brother Lawrence talked about this, right? And when in his writings, he said, "The time of business does not differ with me from the time of prayer. And in the noise and clatter of my kitchen, while several persons are at the same time calling for different things, I possess God as in great tranquility if it were on my knees," meaning in the form of prayer, okay? What Brother Lawrence believed is that for him, there was no start or stop time for prayer, that everything that he did was a glorification to God. And so everything he did, whether it was cooking or cleaning or doing the monk's laundry or fetching water at the well, all of it was in service to God and in the presence of God in that moment. And this became the practice of centering, okay? And we're going to end our lessons with centering. So what do you need to do to center? All you need to really do is two things. First, you're going to sit silently with inner calmness for a few minutes while focusing just on two things. One, the fact that God is present with you right now in this moment. And we're going to focus on a scripture verse or word, our focus that guides our centering. So what we're going to do is you're going to sit in a quiet place. So I'm going to encourage you, go ahead and find yourself like in that quiet place. And all you're going to do is you're going to draw into God's presence. I want you to try your best to forget about any of the events that occurred before this lecture. I don't want you to worry about anything that's going to happen after this lecture. All I need you to do is to focus on the fact that you are sitting alone in silence with God in this moment. There is only you and Him. That's all that matters. The future, the past, they don't matter. Just the presence with God. Second thing I'm going to do is ask you to go ahead and put in your hands and feet in a nice comfortable position. And I want you to take a nice deep breath. And as you take that nice deep breath, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and close your eyes. Go ahead and exhale. I'm going to ask you again, go ahead and take another nice deep breath. Keep your eyes closed and exhale. And this time, what I'm going to ask you to do is take one more nice deep breath. And as you breathe in, think about all those worries or concerns, right, that you have for the future, and give those to God. And as you exhale, you're going to let those go. And you're going to draw into the fact that you're sitting with God in this moment right now. I'm going to ask you to center for just 2 minutes on this scripture verse that comes to us from Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. I'm going to ask you to sit in God's presence quietly for just 2 minutes. Listen to God speaking to you. Be still and know that I am God for just these 2 minutes, and then we're going to come right back. Okay, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take a nice deep breath and open your eyes and come on back. All right, so folks, like I said, we're going to end each of our lessons with this centering activity. We'll end it the same way, where we take a few moments to be present with God in that moment, right? And just to kind of hit the reset button on our week. As you do this more and more, you'll start to discover it becomes easier and easier to center. You can center for longer periods of time. I wake up in the morning and I center for about half an hour every single morning, and sometimes a little longer on weekends when I have time. It's a real nice practice to get into, where if you're nervous for a test, an exam, an interview, you don't have to center for long periods of time. You can just take 2 to 3 minutes, right? Center in your car on a scripture verse and just focus and be with God in that moment. In fact, Mother Teresa was a huge fan of centering. She believed that it was like inviting Christ, as she described it, into her heart to kneel and pray. So I'd encourage you to go ahead and continue that practice outside of class, but we'll always end our class this way. Folks, that is all the information I have for you today. Remember, look at that syllabus. Don't forget, if you have questions, you want to connect over coffee, over office hours, you know how to email me to get a hold of me. Thank you for joining for this week's lecture. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you all. God bless.